There comes a moment in a woman's life when she no longer asks, "Who should I love?" but begins to wonder, "Who am I?" when no one is standing beside me. That question doesn't arise amid bustling days, but often visits in moments of deep stillness after she's walked through half-hearted relationships. Demands that never truly belonged to her, and even the pitying glances cast her way simply because she's living alone. Society may call it loneliness, but under the light of analytical psychology, Carl Jung saw something else, a threshold into the deepest personal journey, a path where a woman stops chasing roles assigned to her and starts listening to the voice within, no longer living to be chosen by someone else, but living to choose herself. Living alone, no longer a retreat, but a return, no longer a symptom of isolation, but a sacred rite of passage where she steps into uncharted territory. No one taught her how to walk, yet where she feels closest to her soul. This article is a spiritual map for that journey, not to romanticize solitude, not to glorify separation, but to reveal this truth. There is a kind of woman who chooses to live alone not because she rejects the world, but because she is learning to make peace with herself. And one day, the world will have to learn how to speak to her again, from an entirely different place. 1. Choosing to live alone, in a world that constantly defines women through their roles in relation to others: wife, mother, caretaker. The decision of a woman to live alone is not just a personal choice, but a quiet rebellion against cultural and subconscious narratives long embedded in our collective psyche. She is not merely living alone, she is declaring to the world, "I do not exist to complete anyone else. I exist to fully understand myself." Choosing to live alone, therefore, is not simply a matter of circumstance. It is a decision, a statement, and in the eyes of society, this statement is often misnamed loneliness, rebellion, or incompleteness. But through the lens of Carl Jung, who dedicated his life to uncovering the true nature of the self, this choice becomes a spiritual journey, a profound encounter with one's own being, where a woman must face herself fully, without anyone else reflecting back the image she wishes to see. Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And for the woman living alone, the silence of an empty room is not merely a void, it is a mirror. Here, she no longer performs roles assigned by the outside world. She doesn't need to please anyone, to adjust her words, her posture, her gestures to fit invisible expectations. And in this rawness, something else begins to emerge, the courage to remain with herself. Despite the initial emptiness, in psychoanalysis, the act of withdrawing from the community is often viewed as a sign of depression or psychological abnormality. But for Jung, separation does not necessarily mean retreat. It can be a necessary stage for an individual to break free from the unconscious shaping of society, to embark on the journey of individuation, where a woman no longer lives under the gaze of others, but under the illumination of her own inner awareness. Thus, choosing to live alone should not be misunderstood as defiance against anyone or anything. It is not hostility toward love, men, or family. It is a step back to gather strength. It is a pause to hear the true call from within. A woman can love, marry, commit, but before all of that, if she has never truly known how to live alone, then she has never fully known who she is without a role to play. The question is no longer, why is she alone, but what is she becoming in that silence? And that question opens a door many generations of women before her were never allowed to cross. In the solitude of a room where no one is watching, she learns to converse with her fears, with her shadow. She learns to befriend ambiguity. She learns to redefine her worth, not by whether someone loves her, but by whether she can love herself with complete honesty. Society may label such a woman as stubborn, difficult, or too independent, but from a spiritual perspective, she is the woman who has stepped into the journey of the goddess in mythology, the one who does not wait to be saved but finds her own way home. And home is not a place outside, it is a state of inner awakening. In the end, choosing to live alone is not about lacking someone beside you. It is about realizing that there are spaces within that are not meant to be filled but revered. Because it is in those spaces that you meet yourself again, not through the reflection of others, but through the direct light of your own soul. 2. Solitude in the process of confronting the animus. According to Carl Jung, every woman carries a masculine aspect within her psyche known as the animus. In the depths of the unconscious, Carl Jung revealed that every woman carries within her a masculine archetype. He called this the animus. This is not a tangible man, nor a lover in the external world, but a symbolic image representing strength, reason, decisiveness, and inner authority within the woman herself. The animus is the opposite, but also the complement of the feminine soul. And paradoxically, only when a woman lives in solitude, consciously embraced solitude, can she confront the animus as an inner companion, rather than forever projecting him onto men outside of her. Why must it happen in solitude? Because as long as she continues living in the old rhythm of society, where a woman's value is measured through her roles as wife, mother, caregiver, the animus remains a stranger, suppressed or denied. A woman in this state seeks protection from outside, relies on the decisions of others, delegates her power to masculine figures, and in doing so, loses the internal strength the animus represents. Solitude is not merely quietness, it is a sacred space where the noise of society fades. In that space, the woman has no one to project upon, no boyfriend, no husband, no father, to cast the shadow of her animus onto. She is forced to look inward and face the truth. The strength she once sought from others has always been present within her psyche. And this is where the integration of the animus begins. But no confrontation is gentle. In the early stages, the animus may appear as domineering, judgmental, and harsh. This is the inner voice telling the woman she is not good enough, that she must be stronger, that she must control her emotions. An unintegrated animus always carries an extreme tone, either pushing the woman into submissive patterns or driving her to armor herself like a disconnected warrior, out of touch with her softer emotions. However, when the woman has the courage not to avoid, but to listen and observe this figure within her mind, the animus gradually transforms into an ally. From a controlling force, he becomes an inner guide, a symbol of independent thinking, direction, confidence, and steadfastness. At this point, the woman no longer needs anyone to be her support, not because she is cold or closed off, but because she has built that support within herself. This process cannot happen without space, and there is no space more fitting than solitude. In solitude, a woman learns to distinguish between the voices of society and the whisperings of her own soul. She may write, meditate, reflect, and in every one of these acts, she peels back layers of conditioning to directly engage with her inner masculine, a part long suppressed for fear of being too strong to be feminine or too independent to be loved. Carl Jung believed that only when a woman establishes a conscious relationship with her animus can she step into a state of wholeness. At that point, she does not have to choose between feminine softness and personal power, but can embrace both as a balanced whole. This is not neutrality, it is maturity. It is ironic. Society often looks at a woman living alone with pity, as though she is missing something, but in truth, she may be undertaking one of the deepest spiritual journeys, the journey of reconciling inner opposites, between soft and hard, between emotion and reason, between vulnerability and resilience. Thus, solitude, when chosen consciously, is not a rejection of men, it is an affirmation that, I will not come to someone because I need to be saved. I will only walk alongside someone who can respect me as a soul that has learned to stand on its own. And when a woman can say this, not out of defiance, but out of peace, she has indeed passed through a stage of individuation. The animus is no longer something she fears, but a part of herself she has recognized, reconciled with, and invited to walk alongside her. She no longer lives alone, she lives with the fullness of her true self. Free. The shadow. If the animus represents the masculine aspect within a woman that she must engage with to achieve autonomy and direction, then the shadow is the darker, more chaotic, and most rejected part of the psyche. Carl Jung referred to the shadow as the self we have not lived, all the emotions, desires, memories, and instincts that have been suppressed, denied, or shamed so deeply that they sink into the unconscious. And paradoxically, when a woman chooses to live alone, stepping away from familiar social roles, that is precisely when the shadow begins to emerge into the light. In everyday life, social roles as wife, mother, lover unconsciously create a persona, a mask that forces a woman to conceal parts of her true self. She is not allowed to be too angry, too desirous, too selfish. All these forbidden emotions do not disappear, they become the shadow. And when she lives alone, with no one to sustain the performance, no one to keep up appearances for, the shadow no longer has any reason to hide. It surfaces one way or another. One day, she might find herself enraged over something trivial. Another day, she sits in her quiet room and feels an overwhelming emptiness. There are moments when she wonders, am I failing? Was I wrong to choose this path? These are not the truths, they are echoes of the shadow. The voices of repressed parts of the psyche seeking expression. Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." When a woman lives in solitude, she can no longer blame anyone else. No one is hurting her, abandoning her, or controlling her life, and thus, every painful feeling that arises must be acknowledged as a part of herself. The shadow appears not to punish, but to be seen, to be heard, and to be integrated. But this is a journey that requires courage. The shadow is not just anger or desire, it is also weakness, vulnerability, deep shame, buried memories, and the lingering sense of not being enough. When confronting the shadow, a woman may feel as if she is falling apart, but Jung believed that it is precisely within that collapse that a new form of transformation begins. For example, a woman who has always been labeled as too strong might have learned to suppress her tenderness. She becomes cold, rational, distant, afraid that emotions will make her vulnerable. Yet living alone, in moments of weakness, she may reconnect with her forgotten feminine softness. This is her shadow, not something evil or shameful, but a part of herself lost in the process of adapting to the world. Integrating the shadow does not mean allowing it to take control. On the contrary, it is the art of befriending the darkness, to see it without being drowned by it. When a woman can say, "I see the fear within me, I see the jealousy, the sadness, the helplessness, but I do not reject it. I will listen," that is the beginning of spiritual growth. Living alone is not about avoiding others, it is about having no one left to avoid within oneself. And in that silence, the shadow emerges as a harsh but honest teacher. It forces her to relinquish illusions, roles, and hollow expectations, to return to the self that has never truly been lived. A woman who has journeyed through the shadow is not someone who has nothing left to fear, but someone who no longer needs to pretend. She accepts herself in both light and dark. She no longer needs anyone to affirm her worth. And when she meets someone, she does not carry the mask of perfection. She brings the full presence of a soul that has dared to face itself. Therefore, the shadow is not something to eliminate, it is the part most in need of love. No individuation process is complete without passing through the darkness, and a woman living alone, if brave enough, will not only pass through but also carry back the light from that place. A light not given by others, but kindled from within her own heart. 4. Distinguishing between isolation and inner freedom. One of the most common misconceptions about a woman living alone is the confusion between isolation and inner freedom. Outwardly, both may appear the same: a quiet space, an unstructured schedule, a room without a second person. But at their core, they are two entirely different psychological states. One leads to withering, the other to rebirth, and the subtle difference between them determines whether a woman is punishing herself or being reborn. Isolation is a form of unconscious defense. It happens when a person severs connection with the world not out of choice, but from fear, hurt, or despair. It carries the color of avoidance, avoiding judgment, avoiding pain, and sometimes, avoiding the truth within oneself. A woman in a state of isolation often carries unhealed wounds. She chooses to be alone not because she loves silence, but because she does not know how to engage with others without losing herself. In contrast, inner freedom is a conscious choice. A woman steps into solitude with intention, not out of fear, but out of a need to listen to her inner voice. She is not fleeing, she is exploring. She is not lonely, but more deeply connected than ever to herself, to nature, to life. Inner freedom is not a retreat from life, it is a shedding of what no longer feels true. To live a more authentic existence. Carl Jung once warned, the person who does not confront their inner world will be ruled by it from the shadows, and they will call it fate. In isolation, a woman can easily become a victim of her own mind. Negative thoughts, painful memories, and the judgmental voices from childhood can become relentless whispers. Without a stable inner foundation, external quiet becomes an internal storm. Isolation, in this sense, does not nourish, it corrodes. But in inner freedom, that same quiet becomes a sacred space for the purification of consciousness. Because the woman no longer views silence as a threat but as a doorway. She no longer sees loneliness as shameful but as a test of spirit. She learns to observe her mind as a companion. Without judgment, she writes in her journal. She meditates. She speaks to the tree outside her balcony. She cries when needed and feels no need to apologize. This is not withdrawal, it is illumination. There is a fine line between retreating to heal and retreating to shrink. And a woman can only recognize this difference when she is awake enough to ask herself, am I choosing this out of love for myself, or out of fear of the world? Jung called this the distinction between ego-driven action and action from awakening. And at this boundary, a person decides, I am not here to avoid, I am here to understand. To maintain inner freedom, a woman needs to stay connected to the flow of life, not through dependency, but through presence. It might be gentle encounters, aimless wanderings, or a deep dialogue with herself through the pages of a book. It is not a rejection of others, but the absence of needing others to define her. And the incredible thing is, when a woman no longer needs anyone to validate her worth, she becomes most magnetic. Her presence does not demand, it invites. In isolation, one fears being forgotten. In inner freedom, a woman accepts if no one remembers her, because she remembers herself. In isolation, silence is a threat. In inner freedom, silence is a dialogue. In isolation, one lives to fight against life. In inner freedom, a woman lives like a flowing stream, quiet, enduring, and without the need for witnesses. So how do you tell if you are living in isolation or in freedom? The answer is not in the number of people around you, but in the quality of your connection with yourself. If you feel light when alone, feel that you are growing, healing, opening to life, that is freedom. But if you feel heavy, shrinking, closed off, and afraid of the world, you may be in the shadow zone of isolation. Living alone is not always comfortable, but if you dare to face it, to nourish it with awareness, love, and self-care, it will give back to you something irreplaceable, the feeling of being yourself without needing approval. And from there, you begin to understand what true freedom really means. 5. Shattering cultural stereotypes. Singleness is not failure. In many cultures, especially traditional Eastern societies, the phrase, single woman, often carries an unspoken sense of pity. People may not say it outright, but the glances, polite questions, and unsolicited advice all carry the same underlying message. It's time you found someone. A woman cannot walk alone forever. This reveals that, despite how modern society may appear, at the deeper cultural level, a woman's value is still tied to her relationships, particularly marriage, but there is a truth that more and more women are daring to live, to express, and to defend. Being single is not a failure. It can, and should, be a conscious choice, not because they hate men, not because they lack opportunities, but simply because they have discovered another way of living, where inner fulfillment matters more than external form, where they no longer need someone to complete them because they are learning to complete themselves from within. Carl Jung once said, "What is not made conscious will return as fate." And sadly, many women still live according to an unconscious script written by society. Grow up, get educated, find a stable job, but the ultimate goal remains marriage. No matter how successful they are in their careers, no matter how rich their inner world, if they are not married, they still feel not enough. This is a deeply embedded psychological program that causes women to unconsciously view being single as a personal flaw, rather than as a path worthy of respect. It is important to emphasize, choosing to live alone does not mean rejecting love. Often, it is precisely because a woman understands the value of love that she refuses half-hearted relationships, entanglements, or situations that harm her spirit. She seeks a connection born from fullness, not from the fear of loneliness. And until that comes, if it ever does, she is willing to live in freedom rather than sell herself short for the security of social approval. The problem does not lie in women living alone, but in the label society attaches to that choice. The single woman is seen as picky, difficult, unapproachable, or unable to maintain a household, stereotypes that reflect cultural narrowness and cause many women to question themselves. Is something wrong with me? But awakening begins here, when a woman stops asking what is wrong with her simply because she walks a different path. A woman who lives alone but with awareness is the embodiment of maturity. She is not driven by societal expectations but guided by her inner voice. She does not need anyone to prove that she is lovable, worthy, or deserving of protection. She lives in self-possession, listens to her emotions, understands her needs, and dares to set boundaries. She can love, but she does not need love to feel complete. And most importantly, she does not apologize for it. In more progressive cultures, single women are even seen as symbols of intellect and freedom. Writers, philosophers, artists, from Simone de Beauvoir to Virginia Woolf, have spoken of how singleness provided them with a room of one's own to create, to reflect, and to become themselves. This is not detachment from the world, it is a deeper connection with the self. Jung pointed out that every profound psychological journey requires time apart from the outside world, to listen again to the inner voice. For women, this phase is especially sacred. It is when they shed every role, every mask, every societal expectation, to confront themselves. And often, only in the silence of a room for one can they hear the call of their soul. Therefore, instead of asking, "When will you get married?" perhaps society should learn to ask another question. Are you living true to yourself? Because in the end, the greatest success of a woman is not in a wedding photo, but in the light in her eyes when she says, "I don't need anyone to define me. I have chosen myself." So, if you are a woman living alone, do not let stereotypes make you doubt yourself. You are not lost, you are not wrong, you are walking a path that few dare to take, but it is the most worthwhile journey, the journey back to yourself. And there is no failure in that, only a woman learning to live as she truly is, and that is a silent, but deeply powerful, victory. 6. Solitude as an archetypal rite of passage. To the casual observer, a woman living alone may appear to be simply making a personal choice, driven by circumstance, preference, or a desire for independence. But when viewed through the symbolic lens of Carl Jung's concept of archetypes, the collective reservoir of primal images and symbols, choosing to live in solitude becomes more than an act of retreat. It transforms into an inner rite of passage. For solitude, when chosen consciously and courageously, is the gateway into one of the soul's most ancient archetypal journeys, the return to one's true self through darkness, trial, and eventual rebirth. In ancient cultures, a recurring symbol emerges in varied forms: the woman who withdraws from the world, ventures into the deep forest, hides within a cave, or resides in remote temples. She may be a nun, a witch, a wise woman, a seer, but what unites these figures is their departure from society's definitions, stepping into a sacred encounter with the self. Solitude, in this context, is not loneliness, it is the threshold of ritual, the space where old layers are shed and new possibilities begin to reveal themselves. Carl Jung named this process individuation, the journey where the fragmented self gradually unifies with the whole self. For a woman, one of the most challenging yet profound rites to initiate this process is to separate from imposed societal roles and dwell within her own space. Why is this so vital? Because for much of her life, a woman is taught how to belong to a family, a community, a partner, and children. She learns to mirror the expectations of others, to be kind, to be gentle, to be lovable. But when she withdraws into solitude, when no one watches, when no roles need to be performed, she begins to touch the rawest parts of herself. And from that moment, the rite begins. At first, solitude may feel like untamed wilderness, a place where fears rise, shadows emerge, and uncertainty envelops. She may question herself, feel as if she is moving against the current, feel as if she is losing everything. But in ancient rituals, disorientation at the start always signals that the pilgrim has crossed the outer gates and entered the ritual center. And then, something miraculous happens. An ancient image awakens within, perhaps the crone, the wise old woman, brimming with power, transcending the need to be beautiful or appealing, or the priestess, the woman attuned to intuition, mystery, and primal creative energy. These archetypes do not arise through lectures, They emerge through lived experience, in each unbound morning. In every quiet moment asking, if I am no longer someone for another, then who am I? As these archetypal energies are activated, the woman begins to transform. She may not change much outwardly, but her eyes, her voice, her presence become different. There is a stillness, a gentle sharpness, a strength that no longer needs to prove itself. For, like in ancient rites of passage, one who has walked through fire fears no more. Solitude, in this light, is not simply time spent alone. It is a sacred space where old structures dissolve, and the inner self is reassembled. It is where a woman learns to forgive herself, to stop self-criticism, and to view herself outside the lens of comparison. It is where intuition, creativity, compassion, and quiet courage are awakened. And when she emerges from that rite, even if no one witnesses, no certificate is granted, something has changed forever. She no longer belongs to old definitions of femininity. She belongs to herself. Jung once wrote, "Individuation is not about becoming someone else, but about becoming who you truly are, fully." In a world filled with noise, the woman who chooses solitude is the one brave enough to enter the most sacred rite, becoming herself, without needing anyone's permission. 7. Modern stories, women redefining themselves. We are living in an era where old paradigms are being deeply challenged, not through movements or manifestos, but through the quiet, profound stories of individuals. Women living alone are no longer symbols of pity, as society once dictated. They are gradually becoming icons of a new generation, a generation of those who choose to live consciously, deeply, and purposefully, and in the quiet of their solitary rooms. A silent revolution is unfolding, the revolution of redefining oneself. An artist, after years of living amidst crowds and losing her inner voice, shared, "I never truly heard my own voice until I lived alone and stopped trying to please others." She didn't reject society, nor did she refuse love. She simply paused to return within, and from that place, she began to redraw her entire world. Her paintings were no longer reflections of expectations. They bloomed from the depths of her soul. Another woman, a business leader who had lived a busy life under expectations like having a family before 30 and being the perfect woman, now lives alone in a small apartment filled with light. She shared, "I no longer need anyone to tell me who I am. I no longer compare myself to others. I only need to know, today, am I still living true to myself?" That question, simple as it is, holds the core of freedom. She stopped living as the leading lady in society's film and began living as a human being with a soul. Not needing perfection, only needing truth. A healer, who spent many years caring for others, finally chose to spend several years alone to heal herself. In the stillness, she realized, "I used to believe that love meant giving until I was empty. But living alone, I learned that true love begins with listening to my own body, caring for my own heart, and from there, I can love others without destroying myself." From someone always trying to save others, she became the first to save herself. These stories are not exceptions. They are the emergence of a new archetype of womanhood, not living to adorn expectations, but living to befriend her own soul. They may love, they may marry, or they may not. What matters is that they no longer seek external validation to feel complete. The fullness comes from within, from touching the forgotten parts of themselves. And from there, living a life with roots, with light, and with symbolic meaning. Carl Jung once said, "No one can truly see into a woman who has met herself in solitude." That statement is being affirmed today by millions of women around the world. They are not waiting for someone to rescue them, nor do they live in shame over what they lack. They are crafting their lives as sacred rituals, where every quiet moment becomes a doorway into the inner world. And if society still fails to understand them, it no longer matters, because they have learned to see themselves with unjudging eyes. They don't need to become goddesses in anyone's gaze. They only need to become the great mother of their own soul. And from that, a life no longer reliant on applause, but grounded in peace, begins to bloom. Are you one of them? Or have you ever listened to the story of such a woman? Perhaps a part of you is longing for something similar, a way of living no longer controlled by should and must, but guided by awakening. Carl Jung once said, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you, or from holding certain views which others find inadmissible." And perhaps, when a woman chooses to live alone, it's not because she cannot love, but because she has grown tired of having to contort herself in order to be loved. But from that place, she opens another path, where love is no longer the ultimate destination but simply a part of the journey toward becoming a whole person. She doesn't need someone to prove her worth. She doesn't need a relationship to feel complete, because that completeness, now, doesn't lie with anyone else. It lies in every moment she dares to face herself, to sit with the darker parts she's long avoided. A woman who lives alone is not a woman without options. She is a woman who has chosen. She chose to listen to herself instead of the noise of the world. Chosen to enter the quiet room and remain there until she can hear the voice of her own heart more clearly than the voice of the world. And in that moment, she is no longer someone waiting to be loved. She is someone who knows how to love, without urgency, without playing a role, without grasping, but to love from the fullness within. If you are walking that path, you are not alone. You are part of an ancient current, a river where women from every era have once traveled, have once found themselves, and from there, have become free. You don't need anyone to tell you that you are enough, because you are becoming living proof of it, in the quiet, profound, and steady way you choose to live.